Welcome to Speculative Sandbox, your audio playground for creative storytellers. My name is Vickie Lan, and in each episode, I and a guest will unpack a trope with an eye for world building, character development, or narrative structures. You can also join the conversation on TikTok and Instagram. For those times when the real world just doesn't cut it, let's get lost in a fictional one. All right, Lewis, which is typically better, the book or the movie?
It is the book. Usually it is the book. You could do a lot more in a book than a movie. You just have a lot more space to play. There are some where it's dicey, where the
Okay.
movie is very good, but typically it'll be the book. I have to think.
Okay. So then when a movie is better than the book, what makes it better than the book?
I think usually what that comes down to is when the story lends itself better to like a visual medium, when it's a story where you can really like see the visuals and get a sense of things like that. I think sometimes it ends up better, but it is rare, I will say. I mean, there's times where it's equal. But in terms of better, I'd have to think about that. That it is very rare, but I would imagine it'd be something where you have to see it to really fall in love with it, and let the
Yeah,
visuals pull you in.
gotcha.
But oh man, that's tough.
I would say if I had to think of an example where a movie was better than a book, my favorite example is Atonement. Um, which that movie's beautiful. Keira Knightley in the
Uh-huh.
iconic green dress. It's just so tragic. That the,
Yeah.
the twist at the end is just like heart shattering. And I watched the movie first, decided to get the book, and I
Hmm.
read the book, and I wasn't as intrigued. I wasn't as
Hmm.
gripped by the book as the movie was, and I do think visual had a lot to do with it. Have you seen that
Yeah.
movie?
Yes, and I actually just finished reading the book literally last week. It's crazy.
Whoa!
It's crazy that you bring it up because I was like, oh my God, I just finished that. Yes, I've seen the movie and I've read the book, and I would have to agree that the kind of visual component really does add. And along those same lines, for me, Call Me by Your Name. I think
Yeah.
that that movie it really elevates the book because it brings all those senses to the forefront, and I think it does it in a way that I mean, the book is great, but the movie when you're able to see it and when you're able to get the characters' emotions a little more visually and the
Mhm.
romance and the tension, I think it does add a lot, I have to say, compared to the
Okay.
book.
Well, that's
That'd
cool.
probably be my answer. Yeah, it's along the same lines with Atonement. They're the kind of like it's like when you can really get the sense,
Yeah.
like the movie brings it to life, like what's already there in the book. Yeah, so I would agree.
All right, well, Lewis, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to have a great conversation about writing for the screen. But before we
Mhm.
begin, can you please introduce yourself, share with our listeners some of your projects?
My name is Luis Prieto. I am the author of the Hermanos series. It is 4 books. And on top of that, I really like creating art in many forms. So I do dip into screenplays, poetry, drawings even. I'm not a good artist, but I love to draw. And yeah, my main thing that I am kind of pushing is my Hermanos series, those 4 books that I'm very proud of. Not perfect, but I love them.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm excited about today's topic. I'll share a little bit of my experience with writing for the screen, just so that our listeners know what they're kind of getting into. So I was a contracted writer for Realm Media to write a pilot episode and series Bible for an audio series. So not quite screen, if you can say, but it was very much geared towards dialogue first. Thinking a lot about cues and how do you take a story and spread it out over different episodes for one succinct series. And then I started getting really into reading screenplays. Succession is one of my favorite shows. It's an HBO original, and I got the season one print, which is such a good idea to learn about screenwriting is to read about it. And I've been really, really enjoying it. And then just for fun, I adopted my manuscript that's currently on submission with my agent. I went ahead and adapted it into a series Bible. I'm sorry, a pilot episode with the series Bible, and it's just practice and learning and getting out there and so that's my experience at this point. What is yours?
So for me, kind of similarly, my second Hermanos book, The Noche and His Brothers, it's pretty standalone, and I always thought it lent itself well to kind of like To a movie, I felt like out of all of them, it was the one that, since it was pretty standalone and it was just more cinematic in terms of the story, I adapted that one into a script. I've done just for fun, basically. I entered it into a contest, one version of it, and I didn't place, and that kind of made me rethink it. And so I did a second version of the script for it that was completely different than the book. So, I've kind of played with adapting something very closely to the book and adapting something just completely different almost, in a way. But yeah, that's about my experience. I just do contesty type, I write for fun and I love finding new ways to express myself creatively. And screenwriting was a very fun kind of dip into that.
I think this will be an interesting conversation too, because one of the things I'll help to kind of talk about is the difference in scope and lens when you're looking at a book that's meant to be written, when you're querying for agents and what they're looking for. For example,
Hmm.
if we're talking about books with expectations, right, through the
Yeah,
traditional
yeah, yeah.
route. And
Hmm.
what I found to be really interesting is I am currently, this is a little insider baseball right now, but while my agent is pitching to publishers, they also pitch to film agents to get an idea. So if you want to get film deals, and a lot of the times they're looking into what makes the story appealing for film specifically. So
Hmm.
I already got a little bit of feedback, but I'll hear some more next week. Where like what they need for it to be a compelling enough read for, I guess, a screenwriter. So I'm not exactly how the film rights are sold,
Yeah.
how the film people are going to care about the same exact story. So when you
Hmm.
are adapting your novel into a screenplay, what adjustments do you automatically start thinking about first out the gate?
So the very, very first draft, what I told myself is, because you can't write a super long screenplay. It's just not realistic. You can't make a novel length really. Most of the times when you're starting out, I'm not, you know, like I had to keep in mind like it has to be manageable. And so the first thing I did, the very first draft of it, I just kept the bare minimum of what I felt was important. And I said, you know what? And then on subsequent edits, I will start adding, more that I feel like are just like details that kind of bring it to life. So that very first draft, I just like, it was like, plot point, plot point, plot point, like just the important stuff. I really didn't want to like overstuff it right away because I knew I was then going to have trouble kind of paring it down. I
Mm,
wanted it to just be, no fat, just all meat, and then maybe just slip a little fat in there where it kind of fit afterwards, because it couldn't be novel length. I knew I wasn't going to be able to include everything. So I just kind of kept it to the bare minimum for that first draft, just to kind of see, first to prove to myself that I could do it, that I could finish a script, because I never had. I'd started some original ones, never finished them. So I was like, you know what, this is adapting. I'm going to keep as much as I can, as much as like what's important, and then start seeing where I can kind of play with it and maybe bring some more of the book to it. So I did a very like bare minimum draft first.
a lot of people listening here, and a lot of my guests, when we start talking about tropes,
Hmm.
very rarely do we just stick to book examples, right?
Yeah.
And because movies are such a huge impact on us, um,
Yeah.
why? How do you think when you're okay? So you talked a little bit about it. You talked about like making sure there's no like, trimming the fat. I guess you can say starting off lean, adding in later. But
Mhm.
how? Let's walk through the screenwriting process. How does it differ or compare with the novel writing process? When you sit down and you start plotting out your points, is it more strict?
It is, especially adapting because okay, so the way I write, I'm not really a pantser or a plotter. I'm like half pantser, so I just do like half of it writing freehand almost. Like I have a beginning in mind, a middle and an end, and everything else I just kind of fill in. And then I reach the halfway point and then I start going, okay, now I'm gonna do this and start planning it out. With screenwriting, especially with adapting, you kind of already have it set out for you. So what you're doing is kind of looking at all the bullet points and being like, okay, what's absolutely important for the script, like for the story, what has to be in that script. That's how I started out. I was like, what parts am I for sure going to include? Where am I going to kind of tweak it a bit? Where am I going to start messing with things? That's where I started, was just kind of looking at the bullet points and being like, okay, this is necessary. I have to put this in there. This I would like to put. Let's see if I could fit it into a later draft. This I want to, like I just took stock of what was most important.
I feel like one of the biggest startling or like differences, I guess you can say, when I started adapting, is you don't require a whole lot of description for place setting, right?
Hmm.
In a book, I'm going on and on and on about where they're at and what it matters, but in a script, it could literally say castle in a tone where
Yeah.
it's polite. I can literally say the word castle and it appears, um, which is so true. And I've read books about screenwriting where you have to strike a delicate balance between providing like enough information to so that they understand the purposes behind your descriptions, but to also leave room for the other creatives that are then going to take that word and interpret it into other things. So for a writer that's used to novels, they have to pull back. They have to show, I guess the best way to say it is like generosity towards their fellow creatives to participate in the storytelling. What do you think about that?
It's completely fair. I mean, making a movie is a team project. You have the set designers, you have the actors, you have, usually, oftentimes the screenwriter isn't the director, so you have the director to keep in mind. Your script can't be like, this shot is this shot is this, unless you know you're going to direct it. If it's being sold off away from you, you have to leave room for the director to do what they want, because you can't be so strict and be like, oh, it has to be this shot. Like, no, I mean, they're going to do what they want. So
Yeah.
you have to leave room for the whole team when you're doing a script, especially when you're not the one that's going to be doing a lot of it. If you were like, those smaller movies where you're kind of the set designer and the writer and the director, then yeah, sure, the script can be a little looser about what you want. If it's sold to a producer, it's sold, and you're doing your thing, you have your funding. But for the most part, you have to leave room for the creatives to do their thing. Actually, and that brings up something I see a lot of first time writers to screenwriters do that's a mistake, a pretty big one. Do you want me to go into that now, or should
Yes,
I?
please.
So like overuse of parentheses in terms of action in dialogue. So it'll be like the character's name, parentheses, how they say it, and then the line. You don't really need. I've seen some where it's like every line of dialogue has parentheses of how the actor should say it. That's not really usually done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you have to leave room for the actors to do their thing too, or the director even, how he wants the actors to perform it. I like it's such a like obvious mistake when you kind of know, but you don't realize it at the time. Because I mean, I did that on my first, attempts at script making, where it was just parentheses, parentheses, parentheses for every line of dialogue, and it's like you don't need that. The actors are gonna figure it out on their own. You don't need to be so strict about, oh, the line has to be said this way. Like, no, leave room for the other creatives to do their thing as well.
That sounds like it might be challenging for writers who want to have a little bit more firm control over their
Hmm.
vision. Um, but okay, so let's look at the different ways that people like levels of involvement. So you have people like you and me, they write a spec script, maybe it sells, then it's in the hands of Hollywood,
Hmm.
and who knows what's
Yeah.
going to happen to it. But then you look at people who write, produce, direct, star
Yeah.
in their own stuff, which is like maybe you just create your own production company for you to
Yeah.
do that. Um, uh, if you're the type of author that really likes to have control over everything, is screenwriting going to be challenging for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, there with productions, with how big film productions are, there is so much that is out of your hands. Particularly if you're not also the director, you kind of well, I feel like you write it and then you can just send it off and what's done with it is done with it, unless they ask for your input. You're probably not going to have any. You know what I mean? Like it's just out of your hands at that point. You kind of have to be okay with that possibility that it gets turned into like, let's say, like a mediocre film. Like you just have to live with it. If you can't live with that, I would say maybe just like don't pursue it because like it's always possible. You can have the best director, the best actors, the best whatever, and it could still lead to like not a completely satisfactory product, and that's just the reality of filmmaking. Nobody sets out to make a bad movie. You don't really know how it's going to turn out. Every film is sort of a miracle, as they say. So you do kind of have to be okay with letting some things slip from your control, because when you're a writer for a novel or something, you're basically well, as in terms of when you're creating it, you're God until it gets to the editors and then they rip you to pieces. But you are God for that little bit, and that feels great. And writers, they love having their control. But script writing is a whole different ball game because filmmaking is a whole different ball game. It's not even the same sport, Like
Mhm.
it's writing and that's it. That is the only thing they have in common. They are completely different processes of creation.
Yeah, they say there's the movie you write, there's the movie you film, and there's the movie you edit.
Yeah,
At
yes.
any point.
Yeah, it just switches at any point. You'd never know when it's gonna go kind of off the rails, I guess you could say. I don't like saying that because I don't like being too critical because it's hard making movies, that's
Yeah.
not easy. It's difficult. I don't mean it super critically, but it's true. I mean, sometimes things just go out of control, and it's like, what can you do? You know,
Yeah,
I,
one of the things I love to read when it all does come together really well. So let me reach for it. Oh, it's just out of reach. So hopefully you can see it. I know I've got my screen, but this is the
the script book, the scripts.
this that's the
Oh,
script
that
book.
thing is huge.
It is huge. It is so well written, and I think
Mhm,
what struck me first and foremost is how much of the characters in the HBO show Succession was on the page already. There's so much
mhm,
that we can affiliate with, and the actors did a fantastic job bringing it to life. But some of that sassiness that I just thought
mhm.
was maybe improvised or enhanced by the actors, I open up the book and I read it. I'm like, oh, that was in there. That was
Yeah.
intentional from the start. And of course, this thing is written by Jesse Armstrong, and right, yeah, I believe it was written by him. So he is at least some of it. I know that they have
Mhm.
support writers and everything. Very, very well written. So let's talk about that. How do you how do you wrap an idea around a character with such limited space? And you can't rely on it, the descriptions like you do
Yeah.
in a
I'm a firm believer that every line has to count for something. It doesn't mean that every line has to be exposition or even to, necessarily move the plot. I'm not one of those people that's real strict about, oh, this line has to move the plot forward. But I think if you're gonna put it there, it has to tell you something about the character. It has to give some of their personality, their vibe.
Mm,
I so that's where I kind of work from, where I was like, does this line need to be here? And if it does, what is it trying to get across? What is it trying to tell me about the character, about wherever they are? I just feel like it should have a purpose because you have such limited room. And it goes back to that thing of wanting to trim the fat when you have such little space to get the characters, the plot, everything in there and across. You do kind of have to like make everything count. You have to be economic with it, as they like to say. You have to make everything worth it. Why does this line deserve to be in the movie? Why does this plot point? Like you do have to kind of keep that in mind, like with such limited space,
mm.
everything has to matter.
And you're lacking. Okay, what makes books so exceptional is internality, right? You have an idea of
Mhm.
what's going on in the character's mind, and then unless that's a specific choice you're making in your movie, you're not relying on internality. So when you are crafting together a scene and you want, like, how are you, what do you decide makes it into a scene that then fills in some of the gaps that we otherwise would have gotten with internality in a book?
So this is actually interesting because this was a particular problem for me when adapting this book because the main character is named Tenoch. He is very internal. A lot of things are happening around him, and the book, you see it from his point of view. You get his inner thoughts. You really get to learn him like that. When I did the first version of the screenplay, I kind of froze sometimes because I was just like, it's not coming together right. I felt like the character was getting lost and I was just like, what can I do? And so for the second version of the script, I switched perspectives to one of his brothers and kind of told the story from his point of view. And that allowed it to be a lot more open, and like it let the themes from the book come across easier, which surprised me because it's a whole different shift in perspective. So, with that in mind, like, yeah, with every scene, again, you have to kind of say, like, especially with adapting, every scene has to be like, what am I taking from the book, and how can I get this across visually? I mean, here's where screenwriting gets confusing. You're writing it, right? But you have to keep in mind that it has to be able to come across visually as well. So if you're inserting a scene, when you're putting a scene in, especially when you're adapting one from a book, you really do have to keep in mind, like, okay, the book dialogue does not get across anything that's happening in this scene. How can I then adapt that for a film and have the dialogue kind of bring the scene to life and really get across what I need to? It's really just again questioning what's necessary to get done what you need done. It's like this scene, why is this important? Why is this scene? Because sometimes there's even a scene that feels important in the book, but then when you put it into a script, you're like, it doesn't really matter anymore. Like
Mm,
I
yeah.
can I can cover this like in this scene, or I can combine this scene in this scene. It could be your favorite scene. There's a scene I love so much for my book that is not in the final, the second version of the script because it just didn't fit no more and it killed me. But I
Mm,
do think you have to be willing to kill your darlings, and yes, that includes favorite scenes. As heartbreaking as it is, sometimes you have to be like, this scene just doesn't work for a film, and you
yeah.
kind of have to be okay cutting it, you know?
Yeah.
But it's sad.
Well, and again, that goes back to what you said about if you are a writer who really wants to have control over their decisions, like they're even the process of writing a screenplay forces you to
Hmm.
kind of have to make decisions outside of what you
Yeah.
personally like. And even like the traditional publishing industry and like the feedback I'm getting from the film agent already, they're like, cut this, cut that, and I'm like, ugh. Like
Yeah,
little hits,
it
like you
hurts.
said, kill your darlings. Yeah, absolutely. What when you're getting ready to sit down and write a scene and you've got so many things in your head, what tools or tricks of the trade do you use to keep track of what you're doing?
I gotta be honest, I am one of the messiest writers. I just kind of wing it. Honestly, sometimes I'll have like a notes app thing where I keep like important details that I need to remember to kind of bring back or something, or at least like character nicknames or things like that. But like I just kind of go for it because I'm of the mind like you can make it as messy as you want and you could just fix it in a draft later. You know, so I just kind of wing it. Like continuity errors, who's ever heard of those? You know, like we could fix that later. Like that
Yeah,
like you would not believe like me on a second draft, like first draft established character doesn't know Spanish, and then also realize that later on I had them talking Spanish, and it's like, okay, well,
yeah,
you know, this is why we do drafts, you know, because honestly, I gotta be honest, if I write something in my notes app, it's rare that I'm gonna go back and look at it anyways, because I just know myself. So I just kind of wing it, honestly. I'm a very messy writer. I just kind of just go for it, and I said, you know what, it'll get fixed in the edit.
yeah.
You know, and I just go for it. What about you?
Well, yeah. Well, the nice thing about screenwriting is that it's a shorter, like
Hmm.
if we
Yeah.
put a project or file or whatever you want to call it. So you got like, I don't know, let's see, reaching for. So I had actually posted Instagram a long time ago when my book first went on submission. It's like yay thick of pages. 'Cause
Hmm.
I published it. I printed it as is, right? The double lined, one sided,
Yeah.
500 pages. And then when I go and I novelize, I put it
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
episode. It's this little thing of.
That's that's how it ends up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, it's less daunting. It's less daunting.
Yeah.
What I appreciated about adapting my book into the pilot is that it really forces you, like you said, to take a good, strong look at what actually mattered. So it, I like writing them because it's like a fun exercise, and then it's not as
Mhm.
painful when you do have
Yeah.
to go back and fix things, like you were mentioning.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's less exhausting. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a
Right
much less
now,
exhausting.
I'm about almost 60,000 words into my current manuscript, and I'm at that point, and I write actually quite fast. I started it in November,
Hmm.
and I'm already forgetting things, and
Yes.
it's just like your brain just forgets and you just move on. But then I'm like, oh, I know, and in some places it's hard for me to start the scene because I know I have to make changes, which means it's a
Hmm.
cruise liner that you're trying to move, right?
Yeah.
Every time. So yeah, I do appreciate the drafting process a lot more.
Every notes app in the world could not save my memory when it comes to book. There will be continuity mistakes. I just know it. That's why I just kind of let it go because I'm like, no matter what, as soon as I get to that next draft, I'm gonna see a very glaring continuity error. It always happens to me, so I just let it be now. I was just, I
Yeah.
don't, you know, I just live with it.
Do you have beta readers that read your work to help you find those?
I need to for this new one that I'm currently I'm actually in the querying trenches right now. I need to get some beta readers on that one. Honestly, I should have done it even before, but like I said, messy writer. I just kind of wing it and see what happens. But I have this book that I'm in the trenches with right now. That yeah, I should get some beta readers on, honestly, and I probably will. I've had some people like look at it, but those were people I feel like were probably too close to me. I think I need to get it a little, you know, into some strangers' eyes and things like that and get their opinions on it.
In the
But
screenwriting
yeah.
world, have you been through any pitching or have you participated in any of that stuff yet, or is it just submitting?
No, I've just done like contests and really like with screenwriting, I love film so much, and I just kind of wanted to try it, you know.
Mhm.
I've done some contest type stuff. I want to keep doing things like that. I'm really focused on being a novelist, but I would like to, someday do something with the script, I just haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm working on pitching the book right now, I gotta gotta get
Yeah.
that out of the way, and then I'll worry about pitching the movies because that's a whole different, thing. Like they're so different. I'm still, the querying is hard enough, I can't imagine going in front of producers and being like, please adapt my script.
Yeah.
Please fund this,
Yeah,
just
my
begging.
one little experience with it, it's actually so being a writer is surprisingly, at least when you're in the querying or pitching, it can feel a little lonely because you're isolated from the rest of the industry, right? You have if you have an
Hmm.
agent, your agent's working for you, they're doing a lot of that, and you're just kind of on the receiving end. And I guess the idea is so you can just focus on your craft, right?
Hmm.
When I was working with Realm Media, it was the way that this was formatted at least was I was presented with with a prompt, a story prompt, and they said, okay, we want to turn this into a 6 episode audio drama, and we need this, and this for plot progression. So go ahead and write me a pilot, and let's see where we go. And I'm like, oh, I had like
All
a
right.
page and a half of details, and I was like, I need to flesh this out into an actual thing. And so I did. Like I hustled and I got creative and I created this whole world, and then I narrowed it down and wrote this pilot and sent it off. And then they write back and they go, okay, we like this, but my boss actually wants you to do this. Can you do this? And I'm like, okay, then I turn, and it's interesting because the process, everyone was kind of figuring out what they wanted as they went along, and it can feel very interesting from a writer's perspective because you're the one doing some really heavy lifting and
Hmm.
adapting to these suggestions. What you have is, you have people at different levels of involvement and importance that have like ideas, and it's very easy to speak the ideas, but then you're the one that has
Yeah.
to go sit down and turn that.
Make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And my story producer was even getting frustrated. And again, it was just a really great educational experience for me, though. I learned about how to take a prompt and turn it into 6 episodes across. Like at what point, like usually the third episode is the equivalent of like this climax. It's like one of the arcs, the
Hmm.
climaxes. And then uh usually it's the second to the last episode something major happens, and then a full episode dedicated to resolution at the end. So as I'm watching TV shows after that, I'm recognizing those same exact rhythms,
Yeah.
and kind of appreciating the intention behind those things. So yeah, that was my process. It was it was interesting, it was educational.
Yeah. I would imagine so. I mean, I I like I think I could do that, but I feel like it would weigh on me. You know what I mean? Like the constant like, can you change this? Can you change this? Can you change this? Which I feel like, I mean, editors kind of do that to you anyways, but I feel like even more so because you have like so much money going into like a film production, they want it to be exact, like
Yes.
they are very like more demanding from what I've seen. I mean, I haven't been pitching, but secondhand what I've heard from creatives and seen, like they're very much exact on, hey, we're putting money into this, can you
Yeah.
it's almost kind of threatening in a way, it's like, can you change this up, please? It's like, okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could do
No,
that. Or
it's a super interesting because it had me evaluating a lot of things like, the weight of the talent. It's on you, it's on your head, and so many people are reliant on you, and it could definitely feel stressful. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, so anyway, yeah, that was my route. Okay, you started talking about common mistakes that novelists make when transitioning to screenwriting. You mentioned over directions. Anything else that you want to share about that?
Well, you mentioned it earlier as well, and I mean, I do see it in a lot of those, like overly flowery descriptions of like setting and things like that. Just get the point across in a sentence, but make the sentence good. That doesn't mean just like like put any sentence and it's just whatever they have to deal with it. No, make it a good sentence that sets the scene, but just make it like a sentence or two. Don't make a big old paragraph saying this is what the character's house looks like, because I can promise you it's not going to look like that. You know what I mean? The set designers are, depending on what you have and things like that, how much money, they're going to work with what they have, and they do their job. They have their job for a reason. Let them really like bring to life your vision. Just give them like a sentence or two to work off, and get to writing. Like don't focus so much on saying it has to look like this, because chances are it might not look exactly like that,
Yeah.
for one reason or another. Even if you're the director, it might not look like that. You're not the one, choosing like where you can and can't film.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like permits and things, there's
Mhm.
people whose job it is to find a place like, to scout or things like that. So don't be overly flowery or descriptive. Just make it good, make it interesting, make it investing, entertaining. but don't focus so much on details, I would say, overly detailed.
Yeah, I was looking into see because screenplays are so, well, not rigid in its style, but rigid in that there needs to be some standardization so everyone in the film industry can pull from it. I was like, okay, is there like the perfect formatting for screenplays? And I mean, as far as like the formatting, I guess yes, there is, but like how you actually write it out. And someone said, no, there really isn't. You need to read screenplays. You need to read good
Hmm.
screenplays and take away from that. So I was like, okay, which is why I thought Succession was such a great example because it's one of the best, in my opinion, written like shows recently. So I agree with you on that with being careful with overwriting. What software tools do you use to write a screenplay? I wrote mine in Word. It was like tab, tab, tab. I'm like, this is not the
Yeah.
best. I know it's not the best thing,
Yeah.
but it was just for me. So what do you use?
So for someone like me that doesn't have a ton of funds at once usually, and Final Draft is expensive, you know,
Yeah.
which, they do sales and sometimes you can go in with people. But one little miracle I discovered that really helped me write my script with like minimal money is Final Draft Go on the phone.
Oh,
Now, I've written my books from my phone. I am a proficient phone writer. Don't ask me how I do it because I don't even know. I can do anything on a phone. I'm on here on a phone right now. And Final Draft Go, it's a little app and it's basically Final Draft in app form and I think it's like yearly you pay like $10. It's great.
wow.
That's what I did it on. I was like, okay. And it has, I mean, it has less like specific tools than Final Draft, but I was able to write the script, save it as a PDF, and I just have that as my own little thing now. And so I did it like that because, I get why like programs and, a lot of times like software is super expensive and, it's just how it is. But I like that they provided that alternative for people like me that just kind of want to do it casually, but still kind of want that screenwriting experience and the practice. And that really helped me, I have to say. So yeah, Final Draft Go. I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but I found it really useful. But I guess you do have to like typing on a phone if you want to do it. I love typing on a phone. I don't know why. I'm much faster than a laptop, so I always if I
Oh,
could do it on a
okay.
phone, I'm like I'm gonna do it on a phone. And yeah, Final Draft Go, check it out. I mean, if you want to practice writing screenplays but don't want to invest like hundreds of dollars into the software, I think it's worth it if you want to try, honestly.
Okay. And I keep mentioning Succession because that's one book that I have. But are there any screenplays that you think every writer should read just to kind of get to better know the craft?
I love the Dark Knight screenplay. I always look at that one. I don't know why. I just like, well, I mean, I love that movie, but I like that screenplay. I think it like it feels so much like the film while you're reading it. It's one of those, where it's just like, oh, I can like, you understand 100% how the film came from that screenplay just from reading it. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
just don't know. I really love that one. I feel like it's a nice classic kind of screenplay where it's not too like it's not like experimental, so you feel like you're learning while you're reading it, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of written in like a default screenplay style, and that's what helps kind of sell it, It's because you always hear those stories of like, oh, the Quiet Place screenplay was like crazy, and it was all this. That's probably not what you want to like immediately learn from. You kind of have to learn the standards first, and I feel like The Dark Knight is a very good standardly written screenplay. It's very meticulous and I feel like it gets the point across and teaches you things.
What
Because
was
also, I love the Paris, Texas screenplay, but that's not a good beginner screenplay. That one's a little more like you're kind of reading, you're like, what the, it's like
really?
formatted kind of weird. Yeah, I mean, I love that one. That's my favorite movie. And it's a cool screenplay to read, but I feel like it's not one to show beginners and be like, okay, here's the Paris, Texas screenplay because you're probably not going to ever write your script the way that one's written, just because it's like, I don't know, it's old school, so it's a little more like loose, I guess. I don't know. It's a good one though. It's a
Interesting.
good
So
one
what
too.
was the deal with the Quiet Place screenplay?
I've heard that one, I've never actually, I don't know if it's out there. I've heard from people because that's what they pitched and sold it with. And apparently like it's really formatted kind of crazy and has lots of, weird like things. I mean, which, the movie's mostly silent, so I guess they were able to kind of pitch it off those strengths. But I mean, they were probably already somewhat established in the industry, I'm assuming, you know what I mean? To
Yeah.
where they could get people's eyes on it and then be like, oh, okay, I like this weird screenplay. I feel like most of the times you do have to, when you're starting out, have to be kind of standard and then with some connections, get yourself to a place where you can present something a little out there and, pitch it
Mhm.
like that. It just
Oh yeah.
depends. It's the luck of the draw, honestly, sometimes because it's it's kind of out of your hands. It's if the right person sees it, really. But
Yeah.
I feel like more often than not, people kind of want the standard,
Yeah.
at least in terms of formatting and stuff like
That's
that.
what you're starting at, and I feel like that's the way with books. Books, there's in the traditional publishing realm. If you're a debut author, there's so many rules, right? You
Hmm.
have to meet these certain word counts given certain genres, and once you're established, then you can start having fun with it.
Hmm.
Or the conventions of like genre and just different tropes. You have to fit certain boxes. It's been a very interesting journey as a debut, as opposed to if you've had several books out there and now the publisher's like, yeah,
Hmm.
anything you sell is going to be, we're not going to worry as much anymore. It's
Yeah.
tough. It's tough for those that are just trying to get started and
Yeah.
get established to ride on the wave of creativity. But that doesn't mean we should stop. We should always try
Yeah.
to push those norms.
Yeah, oh yeah. Always play within the margins. One of my favorite directors is John Waters, and he has some advice that I have always carried with me for pretty much everything I do, but especially with my creative stuff. He said, "A no is free." So don't be scared to ask for what you want because the worst they're going to say is no. So just try. Like at least try to get what you want, and if they say no, that's fine. It's free. It doesn't cost nothing. It doesn't affect nothing. It's just a no.
Yeah,
So play within those boundaries, push it when you can a little, but be prepared to also be told no and kind of have to pull back. It's just,
yeah,
but go for it. Ask, at least. What's the
yeah,
worst?
yeah. What's the worst that will happen?
Yeah,
You're right where you are. You know.
Yeah, you're just starting from zero again. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Like I'm still here.
Yeah, but I just keep thinking about people who, even like there's so many people out there that are making it, and it's because they kept pushing their idea. Maybe they even had to like finance themselves, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't mean that their idea was wrong necessarily. It just meant like
Hmm.
one particular's perspective, like lens, they didn't get it maybe. And yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. And I think that's all of my questions. Do you have anything else you would like to add about writing for the screen?
Hmm. I don't think so. I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like I got my points across mostly. I feel like, just like really that's the most important thing. And, we harped on it a lot, but it's because it's true. Be economical, in terms of what you're bringing from the book to the script, make it count, make it worth it, and just make it good. Make it interesting. Just keep it interesting. Because I feel like writers get kind of blind sometimes to they're like, oh, this is the most interesting thing in the world. And it's like, no, it's not. But like there's ways to make it interesting. Like be open with yourself. You don't have to be your worst critic, but also your biggest fan. So advocate for your work, believe in it, but be open to, if someone tells you, hey, this could use some work, go for it. And that's how script writing is too. Also, one other piece of advice, read the good scripts, learn from them. Read the bad scripts, read the mediocre scripts, because those also teach you what not to do. Read everything. I read it. Books, I read like, bad, good, from all different genres. And I do that with scripts too. I just look at different stuff and I say, I don't want my script to have this. Because then sometimes when you do that, when you read the script you don't like and you go back to your script, you're like, oh, wait, I'm doing what that script I didn't like is doing,
That's
and
very
you're
true.
able to
Yeah.
be like, oh, okay, well, let me change that up. So I think it's important to read everything. You learn by reading and writing. So just read a lot, write a lot, and even if it's bad at first, you'll get better eventually. It's classic advice, but it's true.
It's excellent advice. Thank you so much. Luis, it's been a pleasure chatting with you on Writing for the Screen today. How can our listeners find you?
So typically on all social media, I'm Louis P underscore writes, LOUIEP underscore, and then writes, WRITES. And then where is it? I have my novel collection, Hermanos, the whole story. It's a big old, it has all four books in one. So yeah, just type in like Hermanos, the whole story, Luis Prieto, and you'll be able to find it, and also the individual releases. So yeah, check those out. I'm very proud of them. Like I said, they are very much a beginner writers is like works, but they're my babies. I love them still, and I'm determined I'm gonna turn them into a film someday. We'll see if it actually happens, but I'm determined. Okay,
Awesome.
it's gonna happen eventually.
Yes. Well, I'm rooting for you, and I know all
Thank
our
you.
listeners are rooting for you too. All right. Thank you so much. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. We have another episode for you guys next week. So I'll see you then, but bye for now.